Hi, wonderful people. I'm Leah Rapaner. As a sociologist, University of Melbourne professor, founder of the Gender Equity Initiative, director of the Future of Work Lab, woman, wife, and mother, I've made it my life's mission to take down every ridiculous gender myth out there. Together, we'll deep dive into the research to get to the bottom of all these misperceptions that are holding all of us back. Don't worry, I've studied these types of questions for decades, and after publishing countless articles exactly on these topics, I know when they are nonsense or real truths. And I'm going to help you learn that too. So here we go. Let's do it. This is Misperceived. On this episode, we're going to talk about friendships, and in particular, friendships for women to other women. What is it that connects women to other women? So what connects women to other women? Like, is it divorce? Is it hating husbands or loving your husbands, or hating partners or loving your partners, or hating boyfriends or girlfriends and loving your boyfriends and girlfriends? Is it difficult bosses? Is it weekends away? Girls' weekends laughing? Is it conflict? Is it the fact that they date an ex-boyfriend? When we think about this, our friendships can be fragile or full of conflict, but they can also be incredibly fierce, full of connection, love, laughter, time together, intimacy. And so on today's episode of Misperceived, we're going to unpack the question, is it in fact a misperception that women's friendships are fragile, or are they fierce? So what is the value of women's friendships? Well, there's research showing that, of course, friendship is an incredibly important social connection between women and men throughout their adulthood, right? That we have these friendships and they're really, really valuable. And of course, there's also research showing that when people have more friends or, better contacts with their friends, they have better physical health, they have better mental health, they live longer. And our social connections are often the ways in which we thrive. They're the ways in which our blood pressure goes down, we have the greatest laughs of our lives, et cetera, et cetera. So friendships are an incredibly important part of our lives. And there's research coming from Gillespie et al. In 2015 that shows that, actually, if you are really satisfied with your friendship, this is a really important predictor of whether you're happy in your life, like whether you have a good life. Regardless of the number of friends you have, how rich you are, how poor you are, all these, your age, your race, these satisfaction with our lives is deeply tied to our friendships. And we know that women in particular have friendships that can be some of the most valuable friendships that they will ever establish across their life. There's a huge range of benefit for women having friendships with women. One of the reasons is it provides an incredible amount of social support, or, we can spend time together and it's really essential for me to have that companionship, or we might get together and we have a really positive social interaction. Those are all the ways in which women are connected to other women. It's really valuable. We can have intimacy with each other. And I don't mean sex, right? I mean an intimate connection, women to women. And then, of course, women are critical as friends to other women in providing what is called instrumental support. And what that means is I know that if I need something, I can call on my woman best friend and she will show up and bring me whatever it is I need. I already did a whole episode about my best friend, Tiff, who actually cut my daughter's fingernails and toenails when she was a baby. I had no idea she was doing that, but that's a piece of instrumental support, right? Like they can help you with money or baking things for you or picking up your kids or showing up when you really need help. So that's the instrumental support. And we know also from the research that, as we age, our friendship groups become smaller. There's something called a pruning effect. And this is the idea that, as people get older, their friendship groups narrow. We have a smaller and smaller network, and into our, say, 30s or 40s, the number of people that we identify as being close friends or in our core friendship group gets smaller. Of course, there's a million reasons for this, and I'll give you a few. One is that, our lives change. So we might have kids or aging parents, or we might move away, or there's all these reasons in which changes in our lives reduce our friendship groups. We also can become busier. We have these like more demands coming to our time, and this can be, professional demands. You might have a job that's really intense. We've talked about this in other episodes. Our time is called upon more. And so that creates less time for friendship, right? We lose. One of the things we lose is our social connection. As our work time gets longer, our connection to others, our spouses, our partners, very rarely do women lose that time with their kids, but they're pruning out people around the periphery. And so that is another reason in which, time over time, as we age, we have less time. And so we have fewer friends. And so, despite the fact that, friendships change over time, we may have a bigger friend group when we're young, a smaller friend group when we're older, that these friendships are really, really important for us. They're really important in our adult lives. And we often think that they play a less critical role, or we often talk about them socially as kind of less central to, say, our nuclear family, say our partner or our children, but they are incredibly important for our health and well-being. They're an incredibly important piece of support around a range of issues, sharing information, getting advice, helping us navigate our adult lives. And we also know from the research that, women really value their relationships, their friendships more than men. That women's friendships are something special. They are something that is often more intimate. There's an incredible amount of self-disclosure, and that women are more likely to provide a range of emotional support in their friendships compared to men's friendships in this meta-analysis. And what that means is they've looked at all the kind of studies that have been done around friendship. Hall in 2011 finds out notes or documents that women actually, in addition to giving more within their friendships, that they expect more within their friendships. So they expect their friendships to provide them with communion, but this is intimacy where we get together. They want their friendships to give them solidarity, and that's mutual activities. They want their friendships to have symmetrical reciprocity. And what that means is I give you what you give me, and we're loyal to each other. And they're less likely to have this expectation around, agency, what they call agency, that is like they have to be wealthy like me, or they have to have the status like me. So women expect their friendships to be this thing that's kind of intimate. We like the same things, we do the same things, we're loyal to each other, and we give to each other. It doesn't matter if you're richer than me or poorer than me. It doesn't matter if you're in a different professional position than me. What I want is this intimate connection, whereas men may have placed more value on the statusy stuff. So I'm trying to tell you is that women have different types of friendship, that they are much more likely also, I say this, I feel like every episode, to maintain a wider range of friendships. So whereas when men marry, and comes through the sociological research, like when men marry, it becomes their spouse and their kids. And women are much more likely to keep this kind of wider range of social networks. And they expect different things from that network. And that is a very valuable space for women. It's not the same for men. Okay, so there's this question about within friendships, what drives us together or what pulls us together or pushes us apart. And I'm going to talk to you today about an article from Eileen Doherty, 2021, and it's entitled, "It's Just Like a Breakup." It's a qualitative analysis of turning points in women's friendships in early to middle adulthood. And this was published in Communication Quarterly. And what she's talking about is that we often think about critical and key turning points in our romantic relationships. That there's this research about what is a moment in time in which you realize that was your person and you become more intimately connected, or what was the period of time in which you realized that was not your person and you divided apart. And then she talks about the existing research that identifies these turning points, like, okay, hey, it could be that we start to live together, or we could start to hang out, or we're close to each other, or we might have shared interests. And a lot of this is tied to romantic relationships. But she's basically saying there's this turning point that creates connection or disconnection. She then talks about how most of the studies on this type of turning points into friendships, as opposed to turning points into romantic relationships, is focused on college students. And that's obviously not invaluable, but it's a very specific period of our time. And we can all think about that period of time, perhaps when you're, say, 18 to 24, in which you're kind of transitioning into adulthood. Your friendship groups are being negotiated. You're entering adult life, you're living somewhere with someone else, and you're figuring out what you like in another person and what you don't like. I'm not saying that's unvaluable, but let's move a little bit forward in time, which is what she's saying. Let's keep going and look at adult women's friendships. She has 3 kind of main research questions that she's asking. She's asking, are there these critical turning points that are quite salient that bring women close together? How often does this closeness get described? Like, is it that it gets described a lot, or is it actually a disconnection? And how often is it actually creating decreased closeness? So she takes 30 women between the ages of 25 and 44, and they've entered into a study because they say they have like at least one significant friendship with another woman in their adult years. In case you're wondering, they're coming from a range of ethnicities, but they're mostly white. They're mostly highly educated, college degree or higher. Some of them are half of them are single, half of them are married. Some of them have children, half have children, half don't. Most are identifying as heterosexual, and most are living in New York, basically. So I just want you to know this is kind of the sample in which she's drawing, which is kind of tied to her networks, both the recruitment and the networks. And then she does this really interesting thing. So she asks, now I want you to think about this. How would you answer this question? Do you have a close woman friend you've had in adulthood that you would describe as important in your life? And she's asking them for 25 and older. And she's then saying, she's making sure that this was someone that you kind of built in your friendship later on. And then she takes them in and asks them for, kind of some general background about the friendship, how they meet, et cetera, et cetera. And then she gives them a graph. And the graph is tied to turning points. So she's asking, within your relationship, are there turning points that either brought you closer together or further apart? And so she's having them track them. And then if they have these really critical turning points that can either bind or divide, she probes them then about what happened. What was the thing? What was the impetus to bring you closer together? And what she finds across a sample of 30 people is that there are kind of 12 distinct turning points that either bring us closer together or divide women's friendship from each other. The most frequent turning points are things about romantic relationships. And it's either that the romantic relationship of your friend escalated or de-escalated. And that either brought you together or pushed you apart. And 80% of study participants said this was one of those critical points in their friendships. So get ready. A romantic escalation includes this kind of turning point where you or your friend had an escalation in their dating relationship, in an engagement, or a wedding. That is something that will either, for most people, it brought them, well, actually, it's a little bit 50-50. For half the sample, that was a turning point that either bound them together and made them closer, or push them apart in terms of their closeness. The second thing that can happen is you can have a romantic de-escalation. This would be a breakup or a divorce. And so if your friend has had a relationship escalation or a relationship de-escalation, and there's a different outcome. If there's a relationship de-escalation, it tends to bring the women together. So most said, my friend or I had a relationship de-escalation and we became closer as a result. Whereas when their relationships escalate, it can either divide them and make them less close or bring them together. Do you agree that it's always the divorces or the breakups that like bind us? And is it all about a crisis? Like, do we get bound in our relationship closeness around crisis? As you're thinking about this, let me tell you, the second turning point is crisis. So the second experience, again, of her 12 is that if there is a crisis of some type, either you have a crisis or your friend has a crisis, that then it forms a turning point that basically almost everyone talked about. Here was a de-escalation or escalation, and it turned our relationship. And there are kind of two subcategories she identifies. There's either a family crisis, someone died, a parent is ill, something's going wrong in your family, or a pregnancy crisis. There's an unplanned pregnancy, there are fertility issues, there's a miscarriage. And this was often cited as bringing people together. It was a turning point that increased closeness and that friendship became a really key and critical piece of social support. And so if you could come together and provide social support in this moment of crisis, then the relationship got stronger. But if you were unable to, or if you had a friend where you experienced a crisis and they couldn't step in and provide the support, they didn't show up for you, that became a turning point that made you less close. The next change is geographical distance. And this is the thing where you have a good friend who's moved away. If you have this geographical distance, for most, it was a turning point in decreased closeness, right? So thinking about what brings people together, what divides them. The other thing was having children. This was a turning point too. In most cases, this led to closeness, but not necessarily. Now, I've heard this a million times, right? That once people have kids, and I'm going to go back to that idea of pruning. Once people have children, they tend to prune. You end up with less time, your networks become smaller, and your connection and closeness to other mothers can increase because you need that shared understanding. You need a different type of support. And having children can be this really critical turning point for pruning. But then I think the friends that you keep, it seems like from this research suggests become closer. So where are we at right now? Well, at this point in the article, I want you to be thinking like, okay, there are these range of things that happen that bring women closer or divide them. And they could be things like, your relationship's going well, or you're having some sort of crisis, or you've moved away, or you've had children. The other thing that they're finding that actually can push people apart is conflict. In some circumstances, when friends engage in conflict, it actually divides them. It becomes a pivot point that pushes us farther apart. This could be things like your friend doesn't like the way you're living your life, or you don't like the way they're living their lives. This could be things like you're both interested in the same person. There's some sort of romantic rivalry, she calls it. Or they're identifying from the sample, again, it's the person reporting on it and their own friendship, jealousy. It's interesting because she doesn't have in there religion or politics, although I would imagine this may be an even more kind of divisive moment at this moment in time. Although it is important to note that we tend to be friends with people like us. So we're probably much more likely to sit with people who have different political views. There's research from political scientists from way long time ago, and it used to be like, who do you not want to have as your neighbor? And that in the US historically was religious divisions, right? You don't want to live next to someone who's of a different faith. Now, faith is not that critical. It's political attitudes, right? We're very much now about politics is a new religion, or however you want to say that. And so this is one of those things where if there's a conflict in terms of our attitudes or how we are living our lifestyle, that pushes people away. In terms of things that bind people, reunion was another one within it. So if you have ever had like an increased closeness from a girls' weekend, from a rendezvous into a party, like basically someone you didn't know, but all of a sudden you're in this really fun social circumstance, or someone you knew from high school, but now all of a sudden you're like New Year's Eve, you're out having the time of your lives. This reunion can reignite a closeness in relationships that perhaps had lost in previous things. The final ones I'll give you in succession: betrayal divided people, that decreased closeness. And they talked about, in particular, betrayal in romantic relationships. That was a common theme. But what bound people was shared activities, self-disclosure, and travel. I thought travel would push everyone apart because everyone knows it's like you always end up on some trip with someone that you thought you were friends with, right? And then it's like, you're like, oh, wow, we really don't like each other, or we really don't live our lives the way we thought. Like that person is either like not paying the bill, not getting up in the morning, not having a positive attitude. Those are the three things I need. We need to share the costs. You need to be up and ready to go, kind of. And I need you to bring a positive attitude. So if you want to travel with me, that's what I need. Also, I need a shared door in between the two hotel rooms so we can sneak in to each other's rooms, but also close the door. And what I mean is we can lay in bed and watch Real Housewives. We can gossip, and we can eat takeaway and room service. And then you go to your own room, close the door, and then we open it again the next day. And you know who I'm talking about as I describe this. Okay, so those are kind of the activities that are turning points. These can increase closeness. So where I want you to be right now is I want you to be thinking like, actually, women have these incredibly valuable friendships that really are ones that are about increasing closeness and connection. And there are these key things that come through that either bind women together or push them apart. I want to go through one more article where they talk about women's friendships. I'm not going to go in too much detail about this because when I looked at the article, they had about 350 women reporting, and I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the sample size, right? Like I don't want to give you big claims based on a small sample. So they basically did a survey. This is a Pierce, Mackin, Dunbar, and it's in adaptive human behavior and psychology, and it's differences in intimacy level and best friends and romantic partnerships. So they survey these people about what's kind of connecting them in their best friendships. Again, I'm a little tenuous about the data, but I think there was one thing that came through, and I'll read it to you, that I think is quite interesting and is coming through in our mental load interviews that might make sense. And so what they're basically asking, or what they find in this article, is that Best friends can be kind of gendered, but what women want from a best friend is slightly different from what men want. We tend to want people who are like us, so that's true. But for women, they want people, they're more likely to say, I want someone who's like me in terms of they're dependable, they're kind, they give me mutual support, and they have a good sense of humor. So they're much more likely to say that than men. Again, women are looking for these different things in their relationships. There are two things that were really different for men and women. So imagine these are things that, like, men, of course, want dependable people. They, of course, want kind friends. Of course, they want mutual support and a sense of humor, but it's just more valuable for women. But there were two things that were going in the opposite directions for men and women. The first was that gift giving in a women's friendship had a negative impact on the friendship. So if you're expected to be like constantly gift giving to your friend, it strains the relationship. It strains the relationship. This is not particularly shocking, in part because we're hearing through our mental load interviews that like expectation to always be gift giving and thinking about how to create good things for others is a drain. But gift giving in a men's friendship with other men actually was really positive. So men like being the ones who are receiving gifts, right? Like that strengthens the relationship. For men, gift giving strengthens the relationship. For women, it weakens it. For women, having a shared history had a positive effect on their relationships, but for men, it had a negative effect. So men are kind of like this idea that we have a friendship and we give each other gifts. It may be because they actually don't do it that often, or maybe it just feels validating, right? But for women, where there's this expectation of being gift giving, et cetera, it's like, please don't ask me to give you anything anymore. Let's just get together, laugh, be dependable, be kind, and support each other. And so this was something that they find. So is it in fact a misperception that women's friendships are fragile? Or are women's friendships fierce? Well, they're definitely not fragile, right? Because we have all this evidence showing that women have an incredibly special bond with other women, that being with a woman brings them joy and intimacy, connection. They love each other's sense of humor. There's a reciprocity. And in fact, we learned that women's friendships are fierce, man. Like people are connected to each other. And that connection is something that is quite special. Not only special, but brings us this range of benefits. We're healthier, we're happier, we live longer when we have high quality friendships with other women. And so this idea that women are in this world where they're either best friends with someone or pitted enemies just doesn't seem to be true. We're good at pruning the people that maybe don't bring us our fierceness. But God, when we have those fierce people, we are fierce and we're even more fierce together. There's nothing fragile about those friendships. Let me say something to you. Jerks exist everywhere. Jerk knows no gender. So men have friends who are jerks and women have friends who are jerks. And if you're pruning out the jerks, good for you. But we are also nurturing our fierce friends. And those are people that have our back, are on our side, and are with us our entire lives. And we should be grateful for them. And a lot of women are. As per usual, thank you so much for listening to Misperceived, where you don't need a PhD, but you just get to come hang out with me. Smash the like button, subscribe, listen, give us a 5-star. Also, follow us at Misperceived Podcast and at Prof. Leah. And I am wishing you the most fierce 2025 with all your best friends at your back. Mwah. This podcast was produced with the support of the incredible Sophie Squires, the wonderful Kate Danger, the fantastic Rich Berner, and the one and only, the best ever made, Serena Reagan. I would like to acknowledge that our podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today.